welcome back to the Future Print Tech Fest. I'm Karis Kopp, and alongside all the virtually recorded sessions, we have these panels that are along the theme of 5 steps to inkjet success. We started off with strategy there with Marcus, and now we're going to talk problem solving and application. So really delighted to be joined by Alan Bridger, Managing Director of Paragon. Hi.
Hello. And
Simon Edwards, and you are Business Manager, Global Inkjet Systems.
I am indeed. Hi.
Hi. And Graham Tweedale, General Manager, ZAR.
Hi.
Hi. And finally, we have Steve Wood, who is Commercial Director of Fujifilm Ink Solutions Group. Thanks, guys, for being with us today. So when we're talking about problem solving, I think maybe the first thing to consider is that a mistake might be to think technology first rather than purpose first. So maybe if I pick on you first, Simon, just thinking about the work that GIS do, and you work closely with, OEMs, and you're solving a problem with inkjet. Where do you start that process?
Well, we usually start the process by understanding precisely what product somebody's trying to create and which market it's for. I do agree that often the mistake people make is they look for the latest and greatest technology, the newest print heads, whatever the case may be, because that's what's seen in the market. Whereas in fact, there's often technology which has been around for a really long time, which has been proven and very satisfying for the particular market they're after. So I think the ultimate is to really start with the end in mind. Exactly what is it you're trying to make? What sort of markets are you going after? What sort of print quality you need? And then work the problem backwards from there. And often the conclusion you'll come to will be quite different if you just purely go for the latest technologies.
And Graham, if I kind of bring you in on this, there is that, problem-solving, application-driven perspective. You need to consider the fluid and the printhead compatibility first.
Yes.
Are people getting to that, that solution first? Or
I think it's really important to think about the fluid very early on, because that can have a significant impact on the right printhead that you select. And I think too often, sometimes that's left until later in the process, and that can kind of undo some of the work that's done up front. And we find it a really useful process that we run is a 5-step fluid analysis process that takes you through evaluation of the fluid, waveform development, and producing samples on the target media, which really helps to flush out the challenges you're going to have early on in the process, so you know where to focus your efforts. It's a really useful first step.
Yeah. So, as well as the end problem that you're solving with the technology, you're saving yourself some problems down the line, aren't you, by considering all those things ahead of...
Absolutely, and at the end of the day, it's the fluid on the media, on the substrate, that is the end result. So you've got to consider that really early on in the process.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm sure, from an ink perspective, you agree with that. People need to be considering the ink early on in the process there.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's lots of examples where the ink company or the thought about ink is brought into the process very late in the development. Now, that can still work, and it can still retrofit the inks to the design, the print head, the application. That's no problem, but it's quite time consuming. And again, you then got to kind of backwards integrate the kind of ink into the system to make it work. And I think the best solutions are when, as Graham said, when you get these the discussion about ink right up front from a business and a technical perspective, because that's got to be the cost in use, the return on investment. A lot of it is around the fluid that ends up on the material, and then the choices of how you want to cure or dry, which print head, how fast, what the end application's got to be. We found the best solutions are when ink is discussed as early in the process as possible, because you can then integrate that thread of the story all the way through the design, and it really does minimise the cost and the complexity moving forward.
And you're narrowing your opportunities, aren't you, down the line if you're not thinking of that first, right?
Yeah, and certainly when you're talking about new applications and when you talk about new print heads, quite often it's about the raw material availability at the time. And as Simon alluded to, that sometimes actually going back to some of the older kind of technology that's more tried and tested, you tend to find is that as the ink technology evolves, the sort of the capability and the raw materials that are available are much wider. So it gives you a much broader spectrum to achieve the application space you're looking for, because there's a lot more knowns about the robustness in the system and how things are going to be reliable going forward.
Mm-hmm. And to come to you, Alan, as the business kind of a newcomer, relative to others here, maybe you could talk a bit about kind of your journey with that, with finding those right components for the applications that your business has in mind.
So our business is very different to our three colleagues here. So our business is a solution provider of the complete print solution, and Paragon is just to give you a bit of context, is a joint venture between Tricord, who developed high-definition microfusion printing, and Zeal, who are one of the global suppliers of film and coatings. So we've taken the approach of going to customers and trying to bring to them mass personalization solutions for 3D objects which we can print onto. So we start off with the customer. We go and speak to the customer. We ask the customer what they want. And very often it's an ability to decorate the surface of their products on very complex three-dimensional surfaces, such as shoes and such as bottles. To do that, we have to rely on the experts that we have surrounding us here, because we have particular expertise in two areas, which is the film and the coatings and the actual print technology. But we don't have huge amount of expertise in ink heads and in inks and other products as well. So we rely extensively on working with partners to try and bring that solution together for the customer.
And I think one of the things that is really important if you are a newcomer, you're coming into the space, it's that getting to know the other people, the other suppliers. There's a lot of collaboration in industrial inkjet and with future print partners, which is fantastic. Is that something that you found? You've gone in and you've made those relationships with those people, and that's kind of one of the most important steps for a newcomer to inkjet?
Absolutely. The whole Paragon arose out of a joint venture between two different companies involved in printing, so Zeal and Tricord. And already we're working closely with some other partners in inkjet manufacturers, in inks, and in other specialist areas. And without those, it's just impossible. There's so much expertise that Simon and Andy and the others have that we couldn't possibly develop ourselves. It would take a huge amount of time and a huge amount of resource and cost. We have to rely on partners, and that's very much the way to go. We do have particular expertise. We say we're a new company, but we also have 120 years experience within Zeal and around about 12 years experience within Tricord. So while Paragon's a very new company, we are coming from very solid foundations of the two companies as well. But yeah, absolutely. We're Paragon was only formed literally in May, so it's only 1 month old in reality. We're already trying to work with other partners and forming collaborations with them as well to bring them on board. And it's also important as well for supporting our customers too, because we have a couple of multinational customers over in the US, a couple over in Asia, and they can't afford downtime. So things do go wrong. We have to accept that. So to have that partnerships who we can rely on as well to come to the party and help our customers when things do go wrong is fantastic. Also to bring them on board for development projects. So when we are developing a new application, having those specialists on board and working with us is extremely important to us. And, without those partners alongside us, Paragon would fail. It really is that simple. We do need those partners to be working with us.
Yeah. And Simon, that's a key step, isn't it? If we're talking problem solving in industrial inkjet, is those partnerships? Oh,
absolutely. With the new technology, obviously a lot of applications, for example, flexible package printing, digital printing. It's a very high-end application. It's very demanding. The quality requirements are very high. There will be problems when you develop a new technology and products around it. And the key to getting it right is actually doing or problem solving as quickly as you can. And you need to get people surrounded in that process who have a breadth of knowledge of structured problem solving, but getting to the root cause quite quickly. It's very easy to start to bring together a technology and get things to kind of work. but actually to get them to really work in a way which is actually gets the print quality you really need and the types of speeds you need at a price point that's going to actually be acceptable in the market is very non-trivial. So yeah, good partnerships, people that know what they're doing, as early as you possibly can, bring them together, collaboration, try to break down the barriers between confidentiality if you can, which is always a problem. It's a big dynamic. It's everybody knows partnerships are good and working with people is great and collaboration is the best thing. But there's also the challenge of, competition and how do you make that softer and how do you change that boundary so that actually you can get the best collaboration you can without necessarily breaching confidentiality or at least managing it in the best way you possibly can.
And that's a big point, isn't it? It's something that we talked about, or Marcus's panel, previous panel on strategy talked about, is that challenge of being transparent, the challenge of NDAs, the challenge of those kind of fragmented processes. How do we tackle that?
Experiences of recent times, it's been a lot easier. I mean, we've done a lot of work with ZAR, and there's been a lot of collaborations involving 3, 4, 5 partners. And traditionally, it would take a long time to get agreements in place.
Yeah.
But in fact, I've found in more recent times it's actually been a lot quicker. It's actually not as hard as it looks because I think the opportunity is huge. Some of the markets that people are looking to get into are so large that everybody needs to work together to get there. Everybody realises that. So that people, I think, generally much more forgiving than other technology areas, by the way. I actually think my experience with the industrial inkjet market is, in fact, the collaboration is probably stronger than a lot of other places. Mobile phone technology markets, the automotive industry are really closed compared to our industry. So I think we're in a lucky position, actually, because of that. It's quite a different mindset.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective looking at it in terms of different industries. And Graham, that sounds really positive to me. The tide is turning, perhaps, and things are getting a bit more open. What's your experience?
Yeah, it is, and I think that time spent up front investing in the partnership and bringing the right people in, understanding the end goal, it is invaluable. But also, we have a lot of people that come to us where they really want a one-stop shop. And especially if you're new to inkjet and you have a problem, it can be pretty difficult to know, so do I speak to the printhead provider or do I speak to the ink provider, or is it electronics and software? So I think we have to be able to provide as much support as we can in that area. And yes, we sell a component, but we can't behave like a component supplier. It's a much, much deeper relationship that we need to build and work with our partners to bring that support. Because, typically, the problems can be multiple areas. You need to think about the ink, you need to think about the printhead and all parts of the system. Yeah. So I think that partnership approach is absolutely key.
And I suppose that the project management of that is important. If people aren't sure kind of where to go, it needs to be spearheaded in the right way. That solves a massive problem as well.
Yes, and again, I'd come back to that time spent up front engaging with the right partners and everyone understanding the end goal and pointing in the same direction. That really helps in the long run. It may take time in the beginning, but I think it bears fruit overall.
And Steve, staying on that, just to get your take on that, the subject of NDAs, the subject of transparency, is that a problem that needs solving in this space?
I think at the outset of some of the more early adoption markets, I think if companies aren't open, it's going to be very, very difficult for inkjet to penetrate into some of those markets. So I think there's a vested interest for all parties to kind of have an element of being able to share that technology and understand, the levers that we've all got within our own dynamic to try and make the solutions work. And if we're not open, that collaboration is never going to take place. So I think that kind of confidentiality, I personally, I don't see a huge amount of problems with that at the moment. I think most companies tend to work pretty functionally, pretty well with each other. And I think kind of some of the issues are around not just kind of getting the solution right to start with. It's about the longevity of a solution. Is that you often find problems manifest themselves quite quickly, or they manifest themselves in the long term. And without that long term kind of commitment to the partners in that collaboration, it's easy to solve the short term things because you can look at them in a laboratory and kind of understand how failure modes are going to happen. But the reality is people want systems to run for 3, 5, 10 years time, and that reliability only comes from a deep understanding of the technical capabilities and working together to make sure that the return on investment is a strong business case for people, because then they'll come back and invest in again and again.
Yeah, and I think if we're talking about problem solving, you know, from that perspective, everybody's got their own vested interests. There's different areas that people are doing some fantastic development in. They're all solving, individual problems, but there is that barrier, isn't there, in terms of that R&D takes a long time. It's, you know, it takes a lot of financial and time investment. You have to manage expectations of your customer and everyone else who has a stake in it. Is that a barrier, Simon?
It does. I think it is quite critical that when you're developing new technologies that you structure the project in the right way. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to march straight in and build a piece of equipment and think everything's going to be great, and you sort of go for the main event. You build a massive, a big printing system with lots of print heads, and you think everything's going to be fine. But the reality is that's a bit of a false economy. It is so much better if you can do a stepwise approach into the process by actually trying to create smaller R&D projects which really explore the final product that you want with as many parameters around as you possibly can. So that you can't replicate the final machine, but you can get close. And then focus on actually getting that right, and focus on having a structured approach to exploring all the potential things that could be done or need to be done. And that gives you the opportunity, as we've talked about, one of the things, definitely our experience is inks take quite a long time to get developed, because you've got so many things the ink's trying to do. You've got jetting parameters, waveform designs, you've got different types of substrates, you've got different types of speeds, which have all sorts of different issues with when you get substrate speeds going to very high speeds. So trying to recreate that in the R&D environment is critical, because it means you can always go back to it. So you set yourself some baselines, get that R&D project working up front. Then when you start to build up to a larger scale machine, when you start to get problems, you can come back to it.
Yeah.
And we've seen a variety of projects where that's been done well. We've seen projects where it hasn't been done well. Hindsight's a great thing. People then say, wouldn't it be great if we'd done this? But yeah, I think that's a really key thing, actually, is trying to get that front-end R&D project right, get some systems you can demonstrate things on. We know that a lot of the ink manufacturers and other suppliers have got a lot of equipment of their own, which they can do some of these things on. So, they're great people to leverage to, if you're an OEM building machine, to ask the question, what have you got? How do you go about doing it? How can we create something that's close enough to what we want at low cost without spending a lot of money, that can demonstrate the things we need to demonstrate?
And just looking at the last panel, the strategy panel with Marcus there was that discussion around, not why start with the most complex part, why go for the big machine, go straight in when, with the end kind of inline solution, when you could start small in terms of implementation and learn from there. Is that something you're having those conversations around as well?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, you can start with a much smaller scale machine that can be built up quite quickly to demonstrate what you need to do. Obviously, drop watching is a pretty key part, starting out with basic drop watching and get your ink program up and running as quickly as you can. And then you can build up smaller machines as you go. You don't have to do it in like small and bigger, but, probably a drop watching system, small printing machine with a handful of print heads in there that demonstrates it, and then start to scale it up as you go.
Yeah. Okay. And would you agree with that, Graham? Start small?
Yeah, 100%. I think as early as possible, you want to get your target fluid and your target substrate in the print head you've selected, and at a laboratory scale, get it printing and get some samples, because I think that informs a lot of the system design. And we've found it invaluable to get that work done really early on, because there might be ink formulation tweaks that we need to make. It may be that we want to use a different specification of printhead. I think it informs a lot of the process. It's a really valuable step to go through at the beginning.
And I suppose, if there is that instinct to go big, first of all, it might take longer to build it up, but ultimately you're saving yourself time in the long run. If there is an issue, if there is a challenge, once you've brought everything together and it's not quite right for your
Definitely. Solution. And I think we see a lot of people that come to us actually where it's not their first attempt. So they've selected a fluid or they've selected a printhead and they've tried it, and maybe they've tried to scale it up too fast and it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of time and effort that's been sunk into that, and then they've kind of had to wind back and start back at the beginning. So I think that investment up front in the long run is definitely the right way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to ink, we try and very much focus on what we call building block technology. So we try and understand the core competencies around the chemistry of what are the levers that we've got in our formulation package that allow us to tune it to the application or to the system or the printhead. So we spend a huge amount of time up front, taking flexible packaging as an example, is that we're trying to understand what is the right chemistry moving forward, what are the issues that people are trying to solve, and then we try and understand that core chemistry first before we start talking about any products. Then once we understand that and someone says, well, we're choosing X printhead in X system that's got to run at this quality and at this speed, we then understand that chemistry well enough to be able to say, we've got to go here or adjust the chemistry to fit that purpose. Without doing that up front, it's very, very difficult for us then to try and specifically kind of retrofit it without really understanding where you are in the chemistry, because you can spend a lot of time developing R&D projects that never make it to market. So for us, that's very much our process of start from the groundwork and then move up from there. And once you understand it, you can then turn research and development into proper products.
Yeah. And are people open to that? Is there a understanding issue? Again, going back to just following on from the last panel, there's that, inkjet is great at telling other inkjet people how great it is, but maybe not explaining things about it. Is that when we're going through this process, are people kind of pushing back on that at all?
I think the expectations of ink are very high, to be perfectly honest. And I think a lot of that comes from where people are analog printing today, and they're just wanting to basically adopt, an inkjet or a digital process. And I think the lack of understanding of what it takes to develop an ink for a certain application through a system, the challenges that is, that requires, because it's all the fluids going into the system, how it operates, how robust it is, image quality, but then downstream, what has the product got to do? It's quite a challenge, and I think many people underestimate the size of that task. And that's often why we find ink is very late in the discussion, because many people think, well, it's pretty straightforward. We'll just select an ink from maybe our analog ink supplier. They must have a digital product. We'll put it in the system and away we go. So I think there's a real education that needs to go on with the end users to really understand that it's not a case of we can take what we're using today and just make it, turn it into an inkjet ink. It's from the ground up. It's a completely different chemistry often.
Yeah, again, not thinking of inkjet, as a replacement for traditional analog printing. It goes back to that, doesn't it?
Yes, I think the fluid is such a key. The ink is such a key aspect of it, and how it relates to the selection of the printhead that you make. And I think if you select a printhead where you've got a very wide operating window that can handle a wide range of viscosities, it enables you to have a lot more freedom in the ink and fluid that you use, and more scope to formulate and have the chemistry of the ink that works for your application. So, for 3D printing, for example, if you can have more complex molecules within the fluid, you can get better cross-linking, you can get stronger parts. But you might have to select a certain type of printhead that can handle that fluid and handle that viscosity to achieve that result. So it's a hugely important part of the whole process, and it interacts with all aspects of the system.
And Alan, just to kind of, it's great to get your perspective. As you said, it's a different kind of thing than our other panelists. Yeah. Is that something that you're finding in terms of the development? Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that development and what you've come across, and if you agree with what these guys are saying. Yeah,
I very much agree with what they're saying. So you kind of picking back up on your point right at the very beginning, that R&D absorbs a huge amount of time, cost, resource, everything else to get there. One of the things that we put in place is a traditional phase gate process that we adopt, which really does help us. before we'll start any R&D project, we'll always look at the commercial value, because the main reason we invest in R&D is to make profit at the end of the day, and to drive the business forward and help grow the business and serve our customers better. So we always try to make sure at the very, very beginning that we have a very clear goal of what we're trying to achieve, and not only in technology, but also commercially as well. And so we'll have an R&D team working on any particular solution. But we'll always have a review committee who'll be a steering committee, which will comprise not only of technical, but also commercial people as well. And we'll have regular reviews with the phase gate approach. So we have to pass through one phase gate first before we move on to the second phase. And our first phase gate, we could have 20, 30 projects achieving the first phase gate, and maybe only 3 or 4 will go through that before we get to the second one. And it really does help us focus our minds to make sure that we're investing in the right solutions, and to make sure the solutions that we're developing are the ones we want to service the customer as well, and the right ones commercially for the business. So that's the sort of approach that we take, and it's working very well. The other part that we're doing as well is very much bringing the customer into our development work as well. We've been working now with a number of OEMs across UK and Europe, where, because we are trying to develop innovative technology which prints onto the 3D surfaces, a lot of them are finding this new way of printing to be very different to previous ways, but it just gives them new opportunities to print onto things such as shoes. But trying to print onto every material is very, very complex. So bringing the customer on board as well and making him part of our development team has worked extremely well. So we'll very often have shoe manufacturers as part of our team. We'll have domestic appliance partners working with some of our colleagues in Zeal R&D to try and develop solutions with them as well. So we try to incorporate the customer in as many of our development projects as possible.
And is that a challenge? You have they have their objectives. They might want something that's more challenging from your perspective, or does it you develop it with them in mind, and they're kind of with you on that journey?
We've found that providing there's a shared goal. So, there has to be a mutual goal at the end of the journey, otherwise it won't work. And I think that, picking up on the NDAs earlier, I agree fully with Simon that NDAs became far easier to sign nowadays, because people are setting out, or companies are setting out with shared goals and shared objectives. And providing there's a mutual benefit to the project you're doing, NDAs, I think, are just a tool that we can move past fairly quickly nowadays. It used to take 3, 4, 5, 6 months, 12 months to get an NDA signed, but now we can have them signed in a couple of weeks. I think that's because we have many more shared goals. So, if a shoe manufacturer wants us to find a solution to print on their shoes, it's very easy to bring a team together, to create that team, to look at the different polymers that are being used in the shoes, to look at the different inks that we can apply, the different temperatures that we're using. And so I think it's becoming easier and easier. And I think OEMs as well, as they're moving from analog to digital, and they're really seeing the benefits of digital printing, the flexibility it gives and the ability to customize and to personalize. And particularly over the past COVID era, where we've, a lot of business has moved from retail to online. So you have to be able to respond much, much quicker. People's expectations of flexibility on design, of delivery and everything else is so much higher today than I think it was 18 months ago. The businesses are changing, and their expectations and of what they need to do to meet customer demand has also changed. So I think that's also driving a quicker evolution of the digital print technology.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think that's completely right. Everything has changed, hasn't it, over the last 18 months? So, yeah, certainly something to keep an eye on how that's continuing to influence. It was interesting, just there you were touching on that the commercially, whether it's commercially viable, you're going through phases and you're looking at the technical side and the commercial side. Maybe if I come to you, Simon, on that, there could be lots of R&D on a fantastic, technical solution that's brilliant, but not actually doesn't actually have a strong kind of economic case or commercial case for it.
Commercial viability is obviously pivotal, and a challenge is, I think, that, Graham alluded to the fact that we see the same with some projects where people start and they burn through a lot of cash quite quickly and hit some fundamental walls because of the way they've done it. And that obviously impacts the commercial outcome because they spend a lot of money on the project, so they need to get a return on that. So particularly I think the last few years, people can't afford to do that anymore. The stage gate approach that you've been talking about is ideal. So setting that up as early as possible and set up your gates. But obviously one of the first things is to check your commercial viability and to check you've actually incorporated everything you think you might need, which includes all the software. A lot of people are very quick to see all their hardware requirements. They get quotes on all the hardware requirements that they need. They can cost that up quite quickly. They can talk to their customers about potential sell points. But then what they often forget about, of course, is to go with that, you need a RIP system, you're going to need some workflow management systems in place to make things smooth. There's a whole lot of things around the software side that you're going to need to put in place to also make that commercially viable. So having a complete view of it as early as possible is quite important. Although I must admit, there's few projects that we've come across which aren't commercially viable. And that's mainly because a lot of the places where industrial inkjet can be used are still at their early stage. Particularly if you're looking at replacing, or not replacing, but augmenting current analog technologies, there's huge scopes for industrial inkjet printing still. Obviously, some of the other markets which are more entrenched, some of the markets have got 70% of the manufacturing processes industrial inkjet based, and of course they're somewhat proven. So in some cases, the commercial viability is almost guaranteed because it's such an infancy and there's so much opportunity. But of course that does change over time when you start to hit the markets which has already started, and people are trying to augment the markets with some additional value to it. Then yes, you've got to get that commercial viability sorted out earlier. Yeah.
And I guess that's just another case for starting at the end. Starting at the solution, at the purpose, and the application, and kind of working back.
Yeah,
from there.
I mean, there was that. It's the same story. Start with the end in mind. The place we like to start is print quality, defining precisely what you expect to get from your print quality. A classic example is often people, for some applications, say flexible film printing, go straight to 1200 by 1200 DPI, multi-grey level printing. Whereas in fact, a better choice might be a 600 by 600 DPI, more accurate, more controlled, more proven technology, might actually get you better print quality possibly. I'm not saying it's definite, but there are different ways to look at it. So you need to really challenge what is the quality, the print quality that people are after, and at what speed does it need to be done at, and all those sorts of parameters. What's the minimum viability you really need to make that work, and then build on that. Because one thing's for sure about the industrial inkjet market is if you get your minimum viable product right, you may not be able to see the ultimate product you want yet, but the technology is moving so quickly that will come later. So yes, just getting that first market entry point correct, what's the right print quality, what's the right commercial value of it, and then you can really kick the project off on the right foot.
Graham, just to follow up with you on that, first of all, the issue of commercial viability, I think that's an interesting take, that it's moving so fast that can also change. And if we're looking at the cycles of R&D and that sort of thing, how do we or the market kind of keep an eye on whether that's going to be viable?
Well, I think we probably all know of machines that have been launched that haven't been that commercially successful because the market wasn't ready or any number of reasons. So I think that commercial viability up front is really important to understand, but these are typically fairly long developments as well. Okay, so it's really important to keep that refreshed all the way through the process, and it might even mean you need to change some things. I think Simon's points were really valid around, are you shooting for the ultimate specification, or is that actually where you need to be? That minimal viable product may be actually a better solution overall. So I think you need to be conscious of that all the way through the process.
Yeah. Steve?
Yeah, I think we've seen the same thing. There's a lot of instances I've seen of where projects are interesting, they're not commercially viable. And I think there is there is a tendency sometimes for people to move to the latest and greatest and follow what's new on the market and try and integrate that, where the reality is that perhaps some of the proven technology is the right solution. But I guess in a relatively high tech market like this, is that people do want to keep pushing the boundaries and do want to pursue the latest things. But I'm not sure that's always the most viable case. And certainly for us, from a business perspective, we put a lot of work and energy into research and development, and we don't see any commercial success until a product's sold. So we could be 1, 2, 3 years of a development of an ink, and if that doesn't ever commercialise, there's no return for us. So for us, that really challenges our internal mechanisms of how we critique a business model, because it's got to be viable, and you've got to assume that the number of hours you spend in R&D are going to be, you're going to get a return on that investment. So it is quite a challenging business model sometimes. And I think, to the point I made earlier about ink coming into, to the conversation very late, what that tends to happen then is you get a disconnect between the requirements for the project and the cost of the product to manufacture and the end application, the cost base that ink has got to meet. So if it's dropped in at the end, you'll find that someone says it's got to meet X price, and it may well be that the cost of the product is over-engineered and it's too expensive for the application. That can waste a huge amount of time for everybody involved and the end customer and client, who is expecting something that is, that ticks all the boxes but also commercially fits for them. That cycle then just continues to go on and on and on. And to the point, Simon made about kind of this minimum viable product, if we take wide format graphics, for example, we've seen firsthand is that we're 20 years plus in the evolution of that, is that they needed to get going. You needed to take, that step into the unknown, and then the products have evolved and developed, and we're in multiple industrial markets now where we're in the same situation. Is we're right at the tip of the iceberg, really. And, we've all got to understand that this could take, a considerable amount of time. Even though we understand the technology better, the investment in R&D is big, and you've got to be prepared that you're going to be able to do that for a long period of time. But you've got to have that ongoing revenue of consumable and customers wishing to buy the products that you're manufacturing now. Otherwise, there isn't going to be the profits to return into future developments. It's as simple as that, really.
And that's changing quickly. It sounds like, from what you're saying, Simon, there's that, huge amount of areas where industrial inkjet will work and be a great solution. But it's changing all the time, isn't it? Is it hard to keep up with what the kind of the commercially viable option is?
It's not hard for us to keep up because we're a supplier. So hopefully we've got lots of those opportunities. I think there are some specific markets which have got a lot of opportunity, and they're quite challenging. So I think there's a lot of growth opportunity there. I think from an industrial inkjet point of view, there are many, many places. I mean, direct to shape is a really interesting area for sure.
Yeah.
And that, I think, will take off. That's probably going to be a long play, but the massive gain there is huge. I think it's going to be, as Graham's saying, that's a typical long project opportunity. And the first products will be good and the final result will be great. But I think those sorts of markets, direct to shape, is really, really interesting. And I think the traditional sort of flexographic or flexible film printing industries have got a massive amount of growth potential in them as well. Today most of the packaging market is barely digital. You go to a supermarket and there's not a lot of digital product on the shelf. And there's a lot of reasons why it should be or could be. I think there's going to be long projects, and as you were saying, I think these are things which will take some time. They're not going to happen overnight, and they're not going to be in the range of 1 or 2 years, but a lot more. But I think the good thing is that a lot of the companies who are developing these technologies know that, and they don't talk about we've got to get this done tomorrow. They talk about we need to get this. We need to first beat a machine in 2 to 3 years. We really want to have this in the market in 4 to 5 years, and that's exactly the right place to do it. So I think if the companies doing these things temper that approach by understanding that it takes a long time and they're in for the long haul, that will get a massive gain from it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, it's been a great conversation. We are nearly out of time, if you can believe it. I wonder if anyone's got any kind of final words on the issue of problem solving in industrial inkjet for the TechFest audience.
From my perspective, coming from a slightly different perspective from the other three panelists, is that I think, picking up on what Simon said just then, that people don't expect you to solve all the problems tomorrow. And we are in this for the long play. Printing direct to shape, I think, is one of the things that will evolve and something that we're very much involved in. But it takes us a long time to find solutions for any one product. And picking up on where we were at the very beginning, we can only do that with partners. And I think looking at digital printing and inkjet printing, we need to increase the amount of collaboration and partnerships that we all have, and that will help the whole industry move much quicker.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say is that been in the industry for quite a long time now, longer than I would like to think. And when I first started in the digital and inkjet printing industry, everybody was like, this is going to happen really quickly. And I think anyone that's been in the industry for long enough has sort of thought, 20 years ago we were saying it was all going to kick off. The advantage of that is there's actually quite a lot of people that have been involved in this industry for quite some time now who have a lot of experience. So there's people with 20 to 30 years experience in industrial inkjet printing. The best thing is to draw on that experience because it does exist. 20 years ago it didn't, which is probably why it's taken a long time to come together. But now there's the luxury of quite accessible people who know, what are the intricacies of what needs to be done and have structured approach to doing it. And the key is seeking those people out, bringing them together and getting them to work together. And that's what will make the change and make things move quickly, but not just quickly, but move to products which are viable and then can be built on and developed over time, and hence get the commercial viability and get products in the market.
Invest the time up front in building those relationships and partnerships with people that have got the experience. Will be invaluable in the long run. It may take some time at the beginning, but invaluable in the long run for a successful project.
Yeah, and for me, I think today sort of reaffirmed really that we have, the core competencies within each of our own businesses, but the reality is that we don't own all of the solution, and that only by tapping into that expertise and the resources in each of those companies can you pull it together to make the end solution, because alone we're not successful. We have to be working together across the industry. Otherwise, digital print will not succeed. So it's in everybody's kind of best interest to get round the table and understand the objectives, the goals, as quickly as possible, for the greater success.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. And I think, these 5 steps to inkjet success, they are steps because you need all of them. We've talked collaboration, we've talked strategy and everything in this panel, and you do need that as a whole solution. So it's really, really fantastic to get everybody's perspective on that. Thank you so much. I think we're just about out of time. This was problem solving and applications in industrial inkjet here at the Future Print Tech Fest, joined by Alan, Simon, Graham and Steve. Thank you so much to all of you again for being here today. Lots more fantastic sessions at the Tech Fest and more panels as well, so please do make sure you catch all those, and goodbye for now.